Uh, we're just going to talk about where you both came from, and just let's act like this thing's not even on.
Okay.
Okay? Grandma, I always start with Grandpa first. So I'm going to start with you. I want to know your earliest memory, and tell me where your parents and grandparents came from and when you came to the United States. And then, we can just go back off each other. Okay?
Yeah. You want to know where my grandparents came from?
Yeah.
First. Well, my grandfather, Hessling, formerly they called it Klein Hessling, he was born in Holland on the line, which was near Prussia. I don't know what Prussia it means, but it's, I think, the French border. Is that right, Leonard?
No, it was German.
The German border. And he was Holland, and he spoke what we call Heldish, and that's a dialect. My grandmother spoke the Zeeuws language, and she was born in Zeeland, and they met each other somewhere in Holland, and they married, and they came to the United States on a boat.
Do you know what year that was?
I don't know. That's so long ago that I have forgotten. It was long before I was born, of course. But that's just all hearsay.
Yeah.
And they came on a boat and they landed in New York City. And then they went by boat up the Hudson River. And they went, how far did they go, Lynn?
They
To
sailed,
Albany.
They sailed all the way up to Albany and took a train from Albany to Sheboygan.
Why did they pick Sheboygan?
Dairy country. My father was a dairy farmer. It was the dairy country, and there were Hollanders living there, and that's how they decided to go there. I don't know.
Really?
I know why my father came to Sheboygan, because his sister was already living there. We came in 1911, but Elsie's grandparents came about 50 years before that, in the 1800s sometime.
They had several children, and my mother was one. Her name was Angelina. They called her Lena. And my Aunt Jenny was my mother's sister, of course. She was called Janneke in Holland. And then they had Aunt Mary was also a sister, and Aunt Alice, and Uncle Ben, and Uncle John, and Uncle Daniel. That was all, they were all my uncles and aunts. And I think they've all passed away, including my mother, and Jenny, and Annie. And the last three sisters all died of a stroke. They had a heart stroke and became paralyzed. My Uncle Ben and Uncle John and Daniel, they've all passed away too by this time. So our ancestors nearly all have passed away, but it's no wonder because we're pretty old, as you know. I'm 96, I was born in August the 4th, 1900. Leonard is 93. He was born in 1902, is that right, Lynn?
1903.
1903. I've forgotten myself because I wasn't there. And we met at choir practice. Leonard was a singer already before he came to Holland. He and his brothers all sang, and they used to sing male quartets in our church. Let's see, what else can I go? I also sang in the choir. In fact, Leonard and I met in the choir, and we had a strange courtship. I was going out with someone else and had a date with him, and his name was Lou Bruce. And we had what they called Christian Endeavor in those days, and we all attended Christian Endeavor, and if we had a boyfriend, we'd go out with them after the Christian Endeavor meeting was over. Leonard and his friend Johnny Brill happened to come to the same meeting that I was, and Nettie DeBlay, who was my cousin, and they asked us to go for a ride with them. Of course, a new car was quite something in those days, and here John had a Saxon and Leonard was with him, and they asked us if we wanted to go for a ride, and Nettie and I jumped in, although I had a date. And
where did you leave him?
And
he was late.
He came later. He came later for me, and I was with Leonard, and he followed us all the way around different places, and until we got home, and Leonard and I ran in the bedroom, and Nettie answered the door, and Lou said, "Where's Elsie?" And Nettie said, "I don't know." And there I was, hiding in the bedroom. And I'd been going out with Leonard ever since. Lou tried once in a while to date me, but after I met Leonard, he was the one, and the only one I ever had after him. We got married when he was very young. He proposed when he was 17, and we got married when he was 18. I was, of course, old enough to know better, but I was 21. And I said, well, I'm not going to get married until I'm 21. So we waited till I was 21. Then we got married, and we had 3 children. In fact, Gerald was born on July 12th, and he was my oldest son. And we lost him in the Army. He was in the infantry and was killed in line of duty, and I don't think he ever knew what hit him, but he was killed trying to save one of his men that was in the line of fire and had been wounded. He succeeded in saving his buddy, or the man that was working for him. See, Leonard was, Gerald had he was a second lieutenant in the Army. And he was
young too.
Very young, and he saved his friend, but he got caught in the line of fire, for which he was awarded the Silver Star. I have all those medals, and I don't know what to do with them, but I'm going to give them to whoever wants them. And now Bob has some of them, and I have some, and I sent the rest to Barbara. I intended to frame the medals, but I never did get that far. So that's about all I can tell you about my family, except Robert is still living, and he has my two grandsons, and they have a daughter. So he was married twice, and the first time was to Emily, and the second time was to Barbara. She has been a wonderful mother to those 2 boys, and we love her just as though she was our own. Our 2 boys have both been married, and Jim has presented us with 2 grandsons, great-grandsons we call them now. They're the sweetest little boys you could ever wish for.
Thomas and John.
And their names were Thomas and John Henrik. By the way, Henrik is named after Leonard's father, whose name was also Henrik. And we're quite proud that they did that. Gary was married, and
we can skip that part.
he says I should just skip it because he's sitting right here with me. I'm glad that he's going to be happy too someday.
I'm happy now, Grandma.
Yeah, and we're
By the
so
way,
happy.
it's September 7th, 1996. I'm 30. We already got your age and everything. So I'm 30 now. Now, we can go back and forth between you and Grandpa, but I want to hear where you started, where you feel you should start your story.
Well, I would like to tell people that I was born 6 feet below sea level behind the dike in Ridderkerk, Holland. It's about 10 miles south of Rotterdam. My father was what they call a melkboer, a milk farmer. B-O-E-R means farmer. In those days, a lot of the Holland boers went to South Africa because land was practically free there. And my dad even considered going to South Africa because he already had 5 sons. And in Holland, the class system was so strong, if you were once a hired man, you could never make enough money to buy any land and be your own. Because land was already selling for 500 gulden an acre. It takes a long time to buy land at $12 a week.
Oh boy.
So we went to America because we were told that if you go to America, if you have $1,000, you can start farming. You can borrow the rest, which was very true. And my dad fell for it, and we went to Wisconsin because that was a dairy state. Oh, it was a wonderful experience. I remember very little of when I first went to school. I know it wasn't very easy because I couldn't speak English. My 2 older brothers were studying English in Holland, but I didn't know anything. But I could sing the Star Spangled Banner with the rest of the kids. I didn't know what it meant. I found out later what the words meant, but I was always interested in singing. We all were. See, in Holland, in the church where we went, we didn't have a hymnal. We had a psalm book. All 150 psalms were set to rhyme and to music. And some of those old psalms were like Bach motets, and it was just Bach motets. Beautiful music, but of course in Holland language. And we didn't have a choir in a church where we went in Holland. We had what they call a voorzinger. One man would stand up in front and sing songs with a big voice, and everybody would follow. The voorzinger, the front singer.
Right.
So we were brought up as a singing family. I got more and more interested in it when a voice teacher from Milwaukee came to Sheboygan, advertised in the paper that she was going to give voice lessons free to anyone she thought would be worthy of it. So all my friends said, go, sing for her. Well, at that time I thought I was a tenor because in the male quartets I had probably the highest range. I used to sing the first tenor. I thought I was a tenor. I was very disappointed when I took a few lessons from that lady and she said, you're a baritone. But it turned out all right.
Yeah. Well, before, you're already in Sheboygan, but could you tell about your trip? You were on the boat that came over in 1911.
Yeah.
Can you tell about what you remember about that trip?
It was the greatest fun in the world, except for one day we must have run through a part of a hurricane because no one was allowed on deck. They had ropes strung all over. But my dad and I were the only ones who were not seasick. Everybody was getting seasick downstairs.
1, 2,
So
3.
my dad and I went up on the deck. Lord, it was wonderful. We landed in Hoboken.
Hello?
On the Jersey side of the Hudson River, New York.
Oh, hey, Nina.
Let me
How are
stop
you?
this for a second. That's no
And
problem
how's
having that
Pete?
on, is it?
No, I don't know.
Good.
Yeah. Uh-huh. I'm glad of that.
Let's see.
That's Nina. She wants to take us out for dinner tomorrow.
Is that a relative or just a friend?
Just friends.
Friend. Come on back, Grandma.
All right.
Can I move this out of the way?
I
Give us a little more room.
put it in the chair.
Okay. You were talking about your
Coming to
boat
America on a
trip,
boat?
and there was a storm, and nobody was allowed on the deck.
Yeah.
Okay.
My dad and I went on the deck because, you know, everybody down in our cabin was having seasick problems. And it almost made me seasick to watch them throw up. Anyway, my dad and I were okay. So we went on the deck. We had to hang on to the ropes. But we got there fine. And we were in what they call the second class.
Uh-huh.
The first class was in the middle of the boat.
Right.
Second class was on both sides of the first class. Third class was on both ends of the ship.
And they
That's
were
where
really
the
rough.
roughest, yeah, and that was the cheapest fare.
Yeah.
So we went halfway, we got second class.
And you didn't go into New York City, you went into Hoboken.
Yeah. The Holland America Steamship Line was docked at Hoboken, New Jersey. So we never really hit New York City.
Do you remember immigration?
No, I don't remember much because we were all so sleepy.
Yeah.
It was in the middle of the night. And I remember my dad wrote a letter to some of his relatives in Holland and told them what it looked like when we came to America. It looked like 100 houses stacked on top of each other.
Yeah.
With all the lights up there.
Right, right.
And that was about all we saw of New York. We went on the New York Central Railroad all the way to Albany and then all the way to Milwaukee and Chicago. And went right to Sheboygan, and our aunt had rented a house for us, and we moved right in. And then we had to go to school. But the worst thing that happened, my dad got a job on the first paving street, the first paved street in Sheboygan. He worked on that. It was 6th Street in Sheboygan, was paved. And he got typhoid fever.
What's that?
Almost died.
What's typhoid?
Typhoid fever, it has to do with drinking water, I guess.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, we thought he was going to die, but he pulled through. That would have been something. A mother and 8 kids, and then not in America with no husband. That would have been something.
Right.
When Dad pulled through.
Yeah.
And then, of course, in the meantime, we started looking for a farm, which he found immediately.
Do you know how much land he was able to purchase?
We didn't buy land. First we rented, you see.
Rented land?
And we were very fortunate because there was a farmer, he had 2 farms, and he wanted to sell one of them, but meanwhile he needed someone to run that other farm. So my dad got the job to run that farm, and he said, now if I sell that farm within a year, I'll give you $500, and you have to move. And it happened. He sold the farm, and my dad got $500. We found another place, and he was $500 richer. And in those days, that was quite a bit of money.
Right.
We bought several cows for that.
Right.
Anyway, then from then on, my dad was always poor, but we always made it.
Yep.
As a milk farmer. I never liked farming very much. I liked it, but what I didn't like was getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning and milking cows every day.
Right.
That wasn't my favorite job. So I got a job in the raincoat factory in Oostburg, Wisconsin. And Elsie was working there too. She worked in the sewing room, making raincoats for the government. And I worked in the rubber part, where we mixed the rubber and applied it to the cloth. Raincoat factory. And I made pretty good money there.
Mm-hmm.
And in those days, my brothers had to bring their money home, and they got maybe 10% of what they earned they could keep, but the rest they had to bring home for the family.
Right.
And I started doing that too. But then when I got interested in getting married, I thought, boy, oh boy, I have to bring that money home until I'm 21. So when we got married, I was only 18. From then I could keep my money.
Right.
I was bringing more money home in 1 week than my brothers were in a month. Because I was making so much money in the raincoat factory.
Let me, Grandma,
Yep.
this is just for my own benefit. Do you have any memories of these are big time in history. You have the Great Depression, you had World War I. Do you have any memories of World War I? And
Well, I know there's a lot of the guys died of pneumonia, or what was it?
They called it flu.
Bubonic
influenza.
Influenza?
Yeah, a lot of the guys died of influenza.
They call it Spanish influenza at that
even
time.
even before they went to war.
But that's when they were overseas, right?
No,
No.
they're still in America.
Hmm.
The disease made the rounds. Everybody got sick.
Wow.
And
Spanish
a couple of those
influenza.
boys were sons of Johannom, which means Joe Han. Om means uncle, so that would be my uncle. And these 2 boys that died of that influenza, the Spanish influenza, was Bill and Henry. and their name was Klein Hesslink also. Was, and
Well,
you
they
know,
were
I
the
told
first-
you my grandpa was a Klein Hesslink, and he came over with two brothers that were just as old as he was. And one was Bernard Klein Hesslink, and the other one was Johann Klein Hesslink, and then my grandfather, whose name was Gerrit.
Gerrit Jan.
Gerrit Jan is Holland, but Gerrit Jan. My father's name was also Gerrit Jan. And Gerald, my oldest son, is G.J., and he was named after my father. And so on. So I don't think that you'd be interested any more about my, because that's such a long story, because they all had big families. And I've forgotten a lot about their history, except that I know that I called them uncle and aunt. And that's about all I can tell you, unless you got some questions.
Well, when was World War I? Was that 1914?
Yeah.
1914 to 1918?
Yeah.
And was the Depression, that was much later.
Well, that didn't hurt us at all because we were farmers. We always had enough to eat. The only thing was we couldn't get any sugar for a while. And we had
saccharin?
No,
No.
we went without. We bought some brown sugar, we used that. And flour, we couldn't get any white flour unless we bought another 100 pounds of oatmeal.
Pig food I called middlings. And we use that middlings we always used to feed to the pigs. And here we were trying to make some bread out of middlings.
Ugh.
And we all had what they called stamp books. I had stamps for the whole family, so we could buy some of these things. You couldn't buy them without stamps, so
Right.
if you didn't have the stamp books, you wouldn't get to be able to buy the food.
But as far as your lives were concerned, the Depression didn't affect you that much.
No, you see, we raised our own potatoes, brought our milk to the cheese factory, and we used the milk, whatever we needed at home, and traded in the milk for the cheese at the cheese factory. Everything kept on going the way it always
Right,
had.
so you always had your job.
The Depression didn't hit us at all.
You know
I
what
never
we
out of
did?
work.
One thing that we did, we thought, we're going to buy a farm.
Yeah,
So we bought 20 acres
40.
of Isaac Lemieux, and we had our first farm. Also bought a Fordson tractor.
Now
That-
this was your
After
Leonard's-
we were married.
That was after we were married, and we had this 20 acres, and we put in potatoes. They were all grounded out the first year that we were running this farm. We had a couple of acres of beans. They all spoiled because they were too wet, and we had to pick beans till, you know, if there's anything I hate was the job of picking dirty beans out of clean ones. And you probably have as many dirty ones as clean ones. And then you put them in a pan and keep the clean ones, and the other ones we had to get rid of or grind them up and use it for food for the animals.
What, the cows eat almost anything that was vegetable?
Yeah, and cows are, well, they're the fondest of alfalfa and good grass, and you know, cows chew their cud, and that means that they have one or two stomachs before they can digest their food.
We raised corn, you see, and the corn stalks, we grind them up, cut them up.
The
in
whole
cutter,
stalk?
yeah, the whole stalks. And then we piled that up. And that we fed to the cattle, and then we throw a pan full of meal over top of that. There was the ground oats and anything else that was ground up. And the cows gave a lot of milk.
And that had to last all winter long.
That lasted all winter until in the spring when the grass started to grow. Then we could put the cows back to pasture. But in the wintertime, we'd only let the cows out for about an hour for exercise
It
while
was
we cleaned
cold.
the stables.
Right. Did they ever die because of the cold?
No.
No.
Cows give a lot of heat. Cow stable is always warm.
Always one.
Yeah.
You know, you were telling me a story, both of you, about how you used, you know, you didn't have a refrigerator. You might have had an ice box or
Yeah,
something.
yeah.
But didn't you can a lot of things?
Everything.
Certainly did.
Everything. We had my mother, I guess, had about 200 quart cans full of stuff that she canned.
Name a
Even
couple
that all
meals
went-
that you might have had during the winter.
Or she put beef in cans, and she put pork in cans, and we could have the best beef and the best pork any time of the year because that was all ready to eat, all done, and all you had to do was
Heat it up.
heat it
all
up,
done.
and you could make gravy and
And we
with
can-
homemade potatoes, and why just potatoes and gravy was almost a meal. And usually we had our own gardens, and so we could have all the vegetables we wanted in the garden. And my grandfather Hessling, he loved his potatoes and sauerkraut and potatoes and carrots, and but there had to be a piece of pork in it for taste. But he loves anything like that if Lena would make it, and Lena was, of course, my mother.
What did you all do for vegetables during the winter?
Canned a lot of the stuff that
Canned
in the garden,
vegetables too?
string beans and stuff, and did all in cans.
Now you can it. So I mean, this is not just putting it in a jar. It was sealed.
Yeah.
Now, how would you can vegetables so they would?
So
Was-
they keep.
Yeah.
I still do it, Gary. When I've got too many tomatoes, I steam them, and so I can get the peeling off, and cut them all up, bring them to a boil, put a little salt in it, and any other seasoning that you may want to have in it, and then you get these quart jars, and you have them so that they're, what do you call it when you steam stuff and
Hot and sterilized.
with hot water, so that there's no germs in the can,
Sterilized, right.
because one little germ in the
It's
can
ruined.
will spoil your food. And you put the vegetables in there after they're boiled, and fill it to the top, and then fill it with boiling water, and put a cover on that and screw it tight, and you can eat that in January till December, anytime.
So
With the hope that it didn't spoil. in
could
the
you
interim.
tell? I mean, well,
I still often can chili and put a couple quarts aside, and I can eat that next month or the month after. It stays good as long as you have it in a sealed jar, and it's perfectly sanitary, but you got to be very careful that you don't get what they call a leaker, and that's when the air gets into it, and then the stuff will spoil. So if you can, there's a trick to every trade, they say, but canning vegetables is one trick that everybody doesn't know. But I fortunately learned how to do all these things from my mother.
so you think, we have refrigerators and everything today, but you could live without it.
You can't live without it. We lived with an ice box for a long time, and we had to put a pan under to catch the water from the ice, and the floor rotted, so that the water that came out of the ice box went through the floor and rotted the floorboards, and therefore we were very happy when we got electricity, because before electricity there was much more work than after electricity, because we lived in the days when you only had your light from the kerosene lamps, and then from kerosene lamps you graduated to gas lamps, and with iron it was the same way. First you had just what they called a sad iron. Just put that on the stove and have a little something that you could lift it up and quite often burn yourself. But you'd have, then the second kind of iron was when you had 3 irons, and one bigger than the other, and the smallest one, and that had a handle, and we just heat that on the stove until it got hot, and then when it was too cold to take out the wrinkles, then you used another one, and so on, because you could change off having 3 of them on the stove at the same time. And from that we graduated to electric iron, and that's what I use today. I have a electric iron, and then they got what they call a steam iron, and you could steam out wrinkles with the steam iron. I even use that today. Only I didn't have any steam in it. I just made whatever I was. By the way, I was sewing on Amy's rug, and I had some material that had to have the wrinkles ironed out. So I did that today, and got the wrinkles out with my electric iron. But I had to put water on it to make it damp, so I could really get the wrinkles out. And I think that's the last ironing I'll do for quite a while, because it's quite a job to get out the iron and the ironing board and whatever goes with it. And I'm also thinking about giving up making rugs.
By the way, this behind me is the rug that my grandma made for me. And I don't know how long it took you to make, but wow, the work you must have put into all these.
We figure a little over 500 hours.
Oh, it's a lot of work.
And not only
Thank you very much.
and not only work, but I paid for most of the wool that's in there myself, which I got from Maine through my daughter, and paid my daughter for the wool that's in there.
See,
But-
Maine still has some wool in
And
there.
I must confess that when I started his rug, I wasn't thinking about my grandson at all. I was just thinking I wanted to use up the old wool that I had. And so I've got an old, it's a house coat, and it's fuzzy. But that's the only thing that isn't wool. Now I wish I could take that out again and replace it with wool, but it's too late. But when you see the lavender fuzzy stuff in your rug, Bob, you'll know that came out of my house coat.
Colin Bob.
She calls me Bob every once
I meant Gary.
in a while.
I get the boys' names all mixed
You
up.
got,
all the
well,
time.
you got a lot of people to know all their names.
I've made so many friends in my life. I've probably sung in 100 different churches and
Well, more than that.
maybe 500 or 600 different theaters, and on radio and television. And you make a lot of friends that way. And that's why when we write Christmas cards, we start at one end and work till we're finished. Elsie writes 50 cards at least, and so do I. Now I'm having a problem because I can't see well enough to write anymore. So
Just
I think
happened recently.
we're going to cut that down.
I don't know.
Like a friend of mine says, I don't write cards anymore, I use the telephone. Well, it isn't as nice as to get a card.
Right.
So we keep
And
it up
I'm
with-
especially happy with the cards we had the past few years. They were made by my
Son.
grandsons and son, and they made them at Sir Speedy. And boy, that was a big help. I didn't have to write all that other writing and pictures on. I hope that he's got some plan for this year, because
I'll let him know.
Yeah.
And I'll remember for you.
okay, that'll be a big help if we get them made. You know, all I have to do is write the names and who they are, and it helps a lot. Although it's still a job to write addresses. You have to look up everyone. They live far and near, and I got the addresses of all, and I tried to send a card to all of my friends, which number about 100 each.
Well, we said we weren't going to talk about show business, but I just want to mention.
Oh, we can talk. We didn't have to primarily talk about that. I want to hear about that.
I want to tell you how I got started singing
Okay.
professionally. I was doing a lot of singing in the Sheboygan County. I had a radio program, and I sang in 2 different churches on Sunday, one at 9 and one at 11. And then they had a contest in Milwaukee for singers. And I took part in that in the Paradise Theater in Milwaukee, and I won the first prize. Then they had 12 of those contests, and at the end of the 12 contests, they put the 12 first prize winners together, and I won the grand prize. So That's when I won a free trip to New York, all expenses paid, and met some very important people in New York, and decided to go home and save as much money as I could and go back to New York and see if I could make a living with it.
And you had the farm at the time,
No,
right?
no, then I was working for a biscuit company, traveling to all the grocery stores.
Cookies.
And I had a cookie. Paul shows the biscuit company in Milwaukee. They sold, made cookies, and I had to go to all these stores and fill up their cookie bins, you see.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a nice job. I hated to give that up, but I was determined to see if I could make a living with singing.
And you did.
I did. I made it. I made my living with singing for close to 50 years.
Well, tell us, okay, you won the competition and you went to New York City. What happened when you hit New York City and met these influential...
The first thing I did was to get a job in a German Hofbrau. I got all the German food I could eat.
Yeah.
And I had to sing there from like 5 o'clock in the afternoon until 4 o'clock in the morning. Those German Hofbraus were wonderful. Oh boy.
How many people would be in one of those?
Well, we had about 200 at a time people, and we had a German band and an American band. Continuous music from 5 o'clock at night until 4 in the morning. And then the war broke out against Germany. All of a sudden people hated the Germans. So a lot of these beautiful German Hofbraus went broke. And then I started getting jobs in different radio programs, and Fred Waring came from the coast after he made a movie. I auditioned and I got the job with Fred Waring.
How,
That was it.
and how you were with Fred Waring from that time till you retired?
Yeah.
And you know, I have some, or Dad has some films of you in the 50s that you were with him. But how long was that on the radio? When did Fred Waring start on the radio?
1937.
1937. And then when did he start with television?
That was in 1950.
Now, 1950 was really, as far as television went,
Yeah.
it was pretty...
Everybody was buying television sets. You'd like to see people move, you know, it was wonderful.
Right.
So it was kind of rough on us. We were used to moving.
Right.
You
just
stood in the
sang
same spot on radio.
on the radio.
And we had
Now that's
wonderful
all they...
band. Here we had to move. They'd have maybe a 20-year-old kid trying to follow us with a microphone.
Yeah.
We lost all that beautiful blend for a while. I'm surprised that we stayed in television that long.
Right.
But we did, for 5 years.
Do you have any idea what the size of the audience was that was listening on a, you know...
Yeah, they say between 2 and 3 million. We were on Sunday night, prime time.
That's fantastic.
Every Sunday night for a full hour. And we had tremendous audience, a lot of fan mail. Elsie and I have been looking over some of those old fan letters and programs that I saved. I guess we threw away about a bushel of them. But they said really wonderful things about the Pennsylvanians and also about me. So that was a wonderful life. Television was really ulcer work at that time because we had to memorize a full-hour show every week.
Oh boy.
And no tape had been invented.
So
we had to do everything live.
Did you ever make a mistake?
Oh, sure.
When you were on, I mean, a noticeable mistake when you were on television and it was live.
I don't think they noticed it, but I was pretty good at covering up.
Add some words.
They even done that in churches.
Yeah.
Make up words. And I'll say, what in the world were you singing this time? It didn't rhyme anymore, and I couldn't make it rhyme, and I didn't finish the song.
How would you come up with something? You just talk about what you saw in today's paper or something?
No, words from another song.
Words from another song would come up.
Yeah. What do you do when you sing and forget the words?
Oh, I don't forget anything. I make sure